to another episode of Startup Advantage Show. I'm Eric Carlson, coming to you from the Glen Creek Brewery in Lexington's Chevy Chase neighborhood, joined as always by Randall Stevens, and today with our guest, Jim Clifton, CEO of Theryx. Good to see you today, Jim.
How you doing?
Doing
Glad
well.
to be here.
Well, thank you. And one of the reasons we've got you here is you're yet another one of these Lexingtonians who have gone ahead and entered a career in entrepreneurism. Tell us a little bit about how you started. You've gone away from Lexington for a while and since come back. What took you away and what brought you back here in Lexington?
Good question, long answer. I went away to college and sort of began a journey to look at a broad sort of collection of things. I went to school in Lexington, Virginia, at a liberal arts college, and that was sort of the theme of my career, really. And I graduated from that school with a very broad education, liberal arts education, with a focus on commerce, and went to work in the banking industry. Really as an extension of learning as much as I could about business at that point. And I figured I would see as much as I could in that surrounding and learn sort of the basic fundamentals of business in banking. And one of the things that impressed me the most, and I saw big companies and little companies, Fortune 500, all the way down to startup companies, and the one thing that was a common theme was that the person in charge really understood that business the best. And that person that was in charge that knew it from top to bottom. They were as comfortable at the ground floor as they were at the top floor. And that resonated with something in me to start to look at where did I want to go and how did I fit sort of in the business community. And I was sort of always drawn to the more creative, the person who was out on the operations manufacturing floor, to that person who understood the business from the ground up. And I really saw that in these small businesses that were very attractive, very creative, versus a much bigger company. And that sort of set me on this path of seeking out the more creative opportunities. In the middle of all that, I sort of knew I was going to go back to business school. I went back to business school, spent 2 years down at Vanderbilt at Nashville. And instead of I did banking, so I said, well, I need to do something else. So I went into, at the time, quality management was a really hot topic. And I went into accounting and quality management, and that got me into technology and the management of process and manufacturing. And I moved from that into a technology job, into a high-tech company in Raleigh, North Carolina. And then that sort of began this love affair with technology and sort of new technologies. And as I moved from manufacturing into product management, I started to see a lot of different new technologies that were coming about at the time. And one of those was the internet. I literally saw the internet. At a Bell Northern research engineer showed me the internet and said, check this out. And within a flash, I realized that was something I needed to do. And I started at that point to try and find a software company in the internet space that I could go to work for. I sort of knew that the big company thing wasn't where I really wanted to be. It wasn't dynamic enough. That, through a lot of different circumstances, how I found DataBeam.
And you found that back here in your home?
That's right. Exactly the last place I thought I'd be. I actually interviewed at Lexmark. It was a very similar job to the job I had in RTP, fairly large company, marketing, product management. And I thought, I was drawn to this small, creative, early stage, very fluid, very dynamic setting. That is.
So were you trying to come back to Lexington?
When I interviewed with Lexmark, I was. And that's another interesting story in and of itself. My father was 30 plus years at Hilliard Lyons on the retail side. We had been here, and I grew up here. I went to Henry Clay High School. I called the Chamber of Commerce and said, I graduated from business school, and said, yeah, hey, I'm graduating from business school. What do you got?
Right.
And
find me a job.
And I didn't get anything, right? I don't know what I expected, but I didn't get a list of job openings. So I called my father back and I said, have you ever heard of this company called DataBeam? And as a wild shot, actually, because a friend of mine from business school, a headhunter, had called him about DataBeam. And so I amassed all this information from my father, who had heard of him, of course, and gave it to my buddy. And 3 or 4 months after the fact, he says, well, I'm not going to pursue it. I said, well, do you mind if I call him? One thing led to another. I turned down a Lexmark job, thought Lexington was over, ended up taking the job with DataBeam.
Well, for some of the people that may not necessarily be familiar with DataBeam watching this, it's got an interesting background and a lot of ties here in Lexington. When I give a kind of the brief $5 tour of DataBeam.
Right. I caught DataBeam at the end of probably its third or fourth cycle. One of the things I'm sure we'll talk about is this notion of overnight success. I mean, DataBeam was a long-term Lexington-established software company founded by Lee Todd, based upon a set of technologies that he had invented with another co-founder. And he had been through several cycles of invention. I caught him right at the end as the internet was coming. He hired me to help build products for the internet. So that's as I saw them. So they grew from a garage to a couple hundred people, or excuse me, probably about 100 people. Ultimately, my third year there, we sold that company, or he sold that company to IBM.
So you're there at the tail end.
The very tail end.
Yeah.
Well, obviously you've got the ties in with IBM, with Lee Todd, who later went on to become president of the University of Kentucky, and I think do a lot with this field of startups and entrepreneurism in Lexington. From there, what made you decide to go the route that you went?
I'm not sure I chose this route.
It chose you.
Well, and there's a bond, I think, about people who are from this area that, and maybe this is the way it is at every hometown, but there's this siren call to come home sometimes. And so when I was in Raleigh, for example, but I lived in Nashville and I lived in Dallas, Texas, in the wintertime you'd find 30 or 40 people in a bar like this that were pulling on UK basketball. And without a doubt, most of them would say, if I could find a job in Lexington or in Louisville, I'd move home. So that was sort of the call, was to, okay, can I build a career and move back to Lexington? And like I said, when Lexmark, the light went on that Lexmark was going to be it, I fully accepted the fact that probably weren't coming home. Mm-hmm. And so once I did get here, and oddly enough, DataBeam was sold, then what? Right. So if you look at what I've done since DataBeam, was this, to really put together a series of different jobs and created a career that was very unplanned, very chaotic, and my wife would attest to that.
Well, your background really is intriguing to me. Starting off as commercial banking, going to what was then after business school, going to a successful startup that did what most people doing startups want to do, selling to a huge corporation, and then going on to start your own. Do you think that stew, I guess, of knowledge of what it takes from each side helped you breed the success that you've done so far?
There's absolutely no doubt that collection of experiences is what put me where I am today. I mean, that intentionally or unintentionally, and I guess just to follow up, I mean, friends of mine will say they're from Atlanta. Hey, I want to move home. I was like, bring your job with you, because you'll either have to create one here or bring one with you. Mm-hmm. And there's no doubt, I think, that that force and having to be creative career-wise is what put me today where I'm sitting.
I know a lot of times when people think about starting a business, they think about what they want to do with it, what the product's going to be, and that's their passion. They don't necessarily have the business background, the working on a ledger, planning out the budget, doing all of that. Do you feel that you had those abilities, and more than just, I've got an idea for something, here's how this is something that can be accomplished?
I think yes. I think the single biggest learning I've had in the last decade or more is that you have to be engaged with the market and take this amassed knowledge, this theory about what you think the business is, and go talk to someone who is a potential buyer, and ultimately see if it fits. This is one big research project. I mean, if you think about it, and it has a very practical end. That person's either going to pay you with their hard-earned money for what you're selling them, or they're not. And then you got to discover why or why not. And then you got to be smart enough to figure out how to change your offering and do it essentially on the fly. So yeah, you need, this is, to me, this is fundamentally, are entrepreneurs born or are they made? And then the answer to me is, I don't know. I think you need a skill set. I think you need to be analytical. I think you need to be creative. I think you need to be passionate. I think you need to be determined. But I think it takes all flavors of that. I don't sort of put myself in sort of a traditional entrepreneurial definition. I'm not Steve Jobs. I'm much more analytical, much more critical thinking. And I'm not saying he's not, certainly, but I think there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there that are, much more swashbuckling than I might feel like I am.
When you've moved now into the medical field with your latest endeavors, what are the origins of that? How did you go from what you began with to Kentucky Science and Technical Corporation,
KSTC, right,
to where you are now?
Well, I think one of the skills that's required is an innate ability to learn on the fly. What Theryx needed was someone to start the company, and basically live through raising that money and putting the foundation in place.
And it's, maybe give a little more detail, it's Theryx's medical devices out of the university.
Yeah, for lack of a better word, the brainchild was Dr. John Gurley and Dr. Lee Todd had this vision for creating a private company that was, simply put, it's an incubator, a virtual incubator. So we would take ideas from the med center, assess them, invest in them, and then sell them, either spin them out or sub-license them. I have no medical device background, so what was really required was somebody who could start all that, put the framework in place, and be comfortable enough to say, I don't know, but I'm gonna find out. So Dr. Gurley and I laugh. It's like a PhD in business for us. I mean, we've learned a great deal about the medical device business, but it's come at a cost. I mean, it's like school, and we've been to school.
And some of it, Jim and I had lunch today, and we were talking about, one of the big questions is, how do you know if you're successful? It's like, in the case of something brand new like that, what are the benchmarks to even know if you're on the right track or not, or is it worth pursuing, and how long, what's kind of been your experience? I know you got the time frame it takes to figure out on the medical device side is probably, well, maybe it's not. Maybe it's just you can learn just as quickly as you can on the software side of things. But.
It is definitely longer. And one of the differences about healthcare, certainly in the medical device world, is you have proxies for customers, but you really can't go talk to, you can't sell something to somebody. And so you have these discussions about theoretical, if this, then that. We've been very fortunate that we have a couple of board members who have a lot of experience in medical device that I would say probably shortened our learning curve 2 or 3 times, 5 times. And they've been able to set out, there's a roadmap. I think like most businesses, there are certain milestones along the way that you can assess yourself. The question is, how do you get that feedback? Is it noise? Is it truly feedback? I mean, I think it's one of the early stage quandaries, because you get people telling you, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. But are they in the choir, or are they truly critical? We've been able to put together a board of advisors. Well, they're all they love this problem, and so we hear good things from them. And so to your point, we're trying to always bring in fresh perspectives on, is this a good idea? because my feeling is the yeses are very self-evident, the nos are very self-evident. Where everybody loses their money is on the maybes. And the sooner we can shoot a maybe, say no to a maybe, the better steward of that money and that capital we are.
How many times did you have to say no to a maybe in the beginning before you had your first, there's money?
The numbers apply. I mean, you hear this all the time. You know, VC looks at 100 deals, they'll do 3 or 4. I think those ratios apply to us as well. We don't have the luxury. Early on, it's hard to assess, how good is this idea, because you have to put some meat on the bones. So we've put together a process. It's essentially trickle and peel the onion. We put a little bit of money in, we take it to the next step, put a little bit more, and at some point, your bets become bigger. But you're always ready to say no, and you really have to have the clarity of saying no.
How long into it did you realize that this was something that was going to sustain and be around for a while?
He's still in the middle.
Still don't know. But that I think that brings up a whole thought for me is that I think people miscalculate how long it takes to get out of the woods, and that's a whole bunch of discussion.
I'm testament to it.
Because I think people, and I was laughing with somebody on the phone today. Revenue projections, they're half as much and they take twice as long. Even the most well-intended, I think, investors and business folks, I think that rule applies.
In the very, very infancy, if you're not overly optimistic, you wouldn't even start.
Right.
So it's tempering that.
You're sort of it's sort of a catch-22. We decided very early on that we had an idea that was of such merit that we were going to focus about 90% of our time on it because we needed a success. Therix needs to have a success so we can go back to the community and demonstrate that success, that this process for assessment works, that we can do these things here, right? I mean, part of the challenge, I think, and one of the things I would salute you on in doing this is that the belief that this can be done here needs to be broader, and it needs to be stated over and over and over again. I mean, one of the things that sort of lived in different places around the country is that it can be done. It's done there, it can be done here. Those people aren't any smarter. There's more of them, maybe. There's probably more capital. But their ideas aren't any better than what comes out of the university over here, or what comes out of incubators here in Central Kentucky.
Well, and what do you think about the ability to do things here? You started this out of your previous thing. You have a spin-off now of Therix, Bluegrass Vascular Technologies. Obviously, you're showing that it's being done here. What are you seeing as far as the startup community that exists here in Lexington?
It's much, much better than it was, say, a decade ago. But we've got a long, long way to go. It's a challenge. The two main ingredients for any successful community is talent and capital. And every single place you go in the world, including Silicon Valley, it's constrained. I mean, I don't care what you say. It's hard to find money, and it's hard to find good people. There's more of them in those places, but there's more people chasing them. We happen to be on the other end of the spectrum. We're very constrained in both counts. It's gotten a lot better. I'm not sure where it goes from here, but I would say the curve is getting better.
And how have you stayed involved in the startup community?
Randall makes me do this kind of stuff.
Well, I would say that when we started the Startup Advantage Group, part of me kind of having the impetus to get it rolling was talking to Jim. We were both starting to talk about reading Steve Blank's blog and talking a lot about those types of things. And I think early on, we talked to. I remember having conversations. We were like, "Look, we're the oldest. We're in our mid-40s now. We're the oldest guys in town that have been through this stuff once or twice." And I think to Jim's credit, and a handful of others that we're probably all teachers at heart. I think it's healthy in the community to have people that just want to be involved. You know, this is a good example. There's nothing that we know for sure comes out of doing these types of things. We just do it because we enjoy being around each other, talking about these kinds of ideas, those types of things. So I think,
I don't think there's any doubt that for me, and I think everybody's different, but for me, what really gets me going is that early team collaborative teaching event.
Learning.
The stew of this concoction.
The teacher is the student too. You know, it's like, I mean, that's part of it. You know, I know from my own personal experience, I started my first company right out of college back in the early 90s, and I also started teaching just one class a week at the university. And the reason over the years, I did it for 17 years or something like that. And for me, it was always like, got to stay around the students because it keeps me, you know, it kept me wanting to continue to learn or making me continue to learn. So I think it's that feedback loop that you get from being involved in these types of things, I know, from my standpoint.
Have you noticed, you know, talking about the students in the growing startup community, have we started to kind of build the farm system here for people, that human capital that you talked about earlier?
I think so, without a doubt. In the last decade, I'm really impressed with what has been going on at UK. And I think to Lee's credit, I think he planted a lot of those seeds. The other phenomenon is the cost of starting a company has come so far down that these kids can roll out of school and start a company. It used to be, you know, 10, 15 years ago, you'd have to raise a couple $1 million. Yeah. And at 22, you're not going to get anybody to sign that check. But now if you raise...
Well, 99 you might have. Not 2009 or 2012.
Yes, would agree. So yeah, I think it's happening, and that's part of the encouraging part of it. I would say the other thing that you asked a question about, how did I get involved? I mean, I was in another company and got so consumed by that company that I disconnected from the community for about 4 or 5 years, and I needed to come back. If you're an entrepreneur, you've got to have people you can talk to, because it's I mean, I'm a company of one right now. Actually, we just hired our second employee, and it can be very lonely if you don't have the interactive, just from the emotional sort of psychological standpoint. You got to have some interaction, and to have people who share that common interest and build that community is very, very important to the success, I think.
And like, obviously, you know, it's anyone watching it will know that you guys are friends. You have similar backgrounds. You've been through similar wars together. What does it mean to have that? If you've got a bad day, if you've got a product you've had to cut loose, to be able to talk to somebody, whether it's in your field or it's doing something similar here in the local community, that you can remind yourself that why you're in this, why you're keeping going with this and not taking a job at some company and working.
I think it's absolutely essential. I think that this community or this effort of startups would die if you can't support and mentor and help, give and then take. I mean, sometimes I can knock on the door and say, I'm having problems with this board or this investment raise or this, you need somebody that you can sound off with, that's not going to be there to cut your legs out, that can help and say, look, or here's a set of practices or principles that may help you. I think it's absolutely essential.
Yeah, I know, just as an example, just last week, Chris Winfield, who's another entrepreneur in town that's been working, I'm sure we'll have him on the show sometime before too long, and he's working with a guy named Wes Keltner that's doing a gaming company, and there was some legal issues or things that last week came up, and Chris just came in and asked me, hey, here's what's going on. And as he's telling the story, I'm like drawn into my, something that 10 years ago I was like, as soon as he finishes to explain, I'm like, well, I think I've got exactly a parallel example, and here's what I learned going through that. Here's, went and dug out some of the legal work that was done, an opinion that was written on some certain things, and
invaluable.
you know, it's just having somebody go, you know, just to bounce. I hadn't thought about it from that perspective or approached it from that. So I think, you know, I like to say that a lot of the things that I've done, I've just done, you know. Unfortunately, I tend to be first. Like a lot of things, I'm like one of those skin knees, bloody nose. You know, I just learn it the hard way. But you know, and I think you know what we were saying earlier. Once you've been through these things, to be able to share those experiences back with the rest of the community and to help them, you know, help people along the way, and you know, that's invaluable to be able to have a group of people around. That you can go bounce these things off of, because you know, most of the time, if you're entrepreneurial, you're probably doing something first. It's certain aspects of it. That doesn't mean that all aspects of it don't have, you know, relevant you know, experiences that can come in and fill in around it.
If it's not first, it feels like it.
Exactly.
Well, and we were just talking to Sean earlier, and I have a board member who's, again, probably 30 years in the business. And he comments. He said, "I don't have a fear reflex," and it's true. And we had several cases, and it'll happen, and you can't predict them. But something in your business is going to literally be mission critical, and you're staring what you think is complete and utter disaster in the face. And to have someone who doesn't flinch say, "Hey, it's going to be okay. And here's a set of steps to process this with," it's invaluable.
It sounds like you've got a great group locally that you can commiserate and celebrate with, depending on what the needs are. What are some of the other strengths that you found in our local startup community?
There is an overwhelming. It's not a big community, but there's a lot of people very interested in seeing this work, and they are passionate about it, and they are bought into it. That we just need more of them. And there is a large group of people who want things at the university to be successful. And I think those are the groups of people that have formed the core. If you go back to Bluegrass Angels, for example, that didn't exist 15 years ago. Could it be better? I'm sure, like most everything. But those people are interested in seeing this work in Lexington, which wasn't supported before they showed up.
That's about the community. That's about, you know, wanting to stay here, seeing it be healthy, and I think that's, you know, Jim and I talk a lot about the community aspect of it, the unique aspects that are Lexington. Maybe you can, you know, what do you think, Jim, that what's missing? What are the ingredients that we need to go to the next level?
If you read and read about Austin and the Valley and, you know, Boston, well, one of the common themes is there are a set of serial entrepreneurs, successful, that are giving back, that are actively engaged, either investments, they sit on boards, they're doing things like this, they're creating coffee hours and beers after work to give back. And there's an inherent part of the culture that I think we need to recognize and start to participate more in this way of giving back. We need to find the 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever the number is of serial entrepreneurs who are successful and get them engaged in this process.
Do you think Lexington's where it needs to be yet in recognizing them when someone sticks their neck out there and doesn't succeed, that doesn't mean they're a failure?
Not a chance. You'll hear this, and I wonder how true it is, but celebrating failure happens in the Valley or Austin or Boston. It still has a long way to go here. And you hear people say that you learn more in that failure than you can even in success. But I think that we're challenged in that area.
Why? Why do you think that is? You're from here. You grew up.
I think failure, is perceived in the eyes of some to be a dead end. I certainly don't want to invest with somebody who's failed. That kind of response. Toxic. There's a judgment, I think, that goes on I think there's a lack of understanding of this process. There's a lot of control. I mean, I think there's this is a very controlled, I think, culture, and has been, that's opening up. I think what comes to Kentucky comes later than most, and I think we're in a big transition from very much an industrial society to one that's more entrepreneurial driven, and that creates a lot of angst and change.
Your former boss and former UK President Lee Todd said many times to me as a journalist what he wanted the students at UK to do when he was there is stop thinking about what job can they get when they leave school, but what job can they create. Do you think that message has found its way into the teenagers, the 20-somethings, even the people that realize that they can do whatever they're doing and build an app on a phone that then can allow commerce to really come to more consumers?
It's certainly better, but it's not widespread. I still think one of the jokes we have about Lexington is, I'm Jim, what's your daddy do? People are still sort of measuring themselves by, what your father did. Yeah, and so by definition, what do you do, right? And if you're not in something that's known, and
you're a shoemaker, a cooper, or
right, I'm a lawyer, I'm a doctor, right? And I don't think it's widely held that I'm an entrepreneur, right? Or I'm starting up a software company. I'm a gamer, very non-traditional.
I think also we were talking earlier today, just a week ago Friday, Matt Cutts, who's a Kentucky native UK grad, was being inducted into the Arts and Sciences Hall of Fame. I know all of us in the tech community on Monday, there was emails going around that, hey, did you see that after it was in the paper that Matt Cutts was in town last week to receive this? And it's like, how come 2 and 2 didn't get put together that it would have been good to have had all the people from the tech community involved and up, to welcome Matt back to town.
Right.
From Google.
He was one of the early Google employees and
first 100 Google employees.
The father of the Safe Search function.
Exactly. So, Jim and I ask each other these questions all the time and kind of scratch our head. It's like, why?
How'd that get by us?
Right. How is it that how come somebody's first thought isn't, hey, this is going on, I should make sure that, the people in town that are related to that, or where that would leverage, right? That you can leverage that,
yeah.
Right? That you want to pull that in. So, it's not that's a cultural thing, though. I think it just has to be that's not what's first if somebody's thinking. Somebody thought, hey, we're doing a good thing. We're giving this award. We're doing our thing. It's siloed. So a lot of what we have to do is to break down those silos, here in the region, and to get people thinking more broadly. Jim and I were talking at lunch about, we've been reading Brad Feld's new book on startup communities and kind of comparing notes about what Brad talks about is needed to be in a successful community. I think we're doing a lot of the things that he talks about in there. But, I was telling Jim, we were discussing earlier today, that one of the things that Brad talks a lot about is that the difference between an entrepreneurial community and, I'll say, quasi-government or is a difference between a network and a hierarchy. We all operate in a networked environment. You share everything. Everybody wants to know. There's everything is a rising tide and it floats everybody's boat. Whereas I think when you get into institutions like the university and the government institutions, they end up being hierarchical, and therefore they're more protective of information and those types of things. So I don't even know that you can knock those barriers down. I think we just have to keep talking about it, and hopefully it's planting seeds with people to be like, oh, there's no harm in letting a bunch of other people know that this is going on, and hopefully it makes for a better event. And in my mind, what you really want is ticker tape parade for Matt when he comes to town, with and the benefit from that can be that there would be probably another 50 or 100 people that could be rounded up to come, and then he may learn about something that he didn't know about that was going on in Lexington that he might take back to California, right?
He'll start hearing that same siren you did.
Right, right, exactly. So, I think you can see these things happening and things we have to work on.
We've talked about this, and startup companies are not small, big companies. Just like traditional economic development doesn't understand, and typical risk investment capital doesn't apply. I mean, it's not that you try to put it in the right shoebox. It's not even the same language, right? And it's a total misfit. And so some of that is cultural, or most of it's cultural, and some of it is understanding the model that we're in, and being able to talk in that model and relate to that model. If you're looking, to go raise money from somebody who's done mutual funds, forget it. It's just never going to happen, right? And so it gets back to the fear issue. I think people are driven by, they don't want to be perceived to be failures, and so they're very risk averse, but they want to invest. And so if they invest in your company and you fail, then they're going to distance themselves and create a situation where, hey, this guy's a failure, right? So you can't really begin to accept that failure and applaud it, right? So what do we learn? How do we make that better?
Some of the opportunities, I think, though, are also that we import, especially like in places like the University of Kentucky, you're always a huge influx of importing new people and new ideas and thoughts. So, kudos to Dr. O'Hare, who's the Dean of the College of Communications. He's been here now, I guess, about 3 years, but he's already started what's called iNet, an entrepreneurial initiative. He's doing things where he's inviting members of the entrepreneurial community to come and get involved. He's doing things with high school students and asking, the entrepreneurs around town to come and get involved as mentors and those types of things. So I think, it's while there may be cultural issues that are maybe deeply embedded in the culture, there are opportunities that is an influx of new people coming to town and new thoughts and ideas, and that's great. We should celebrate that and continue to push it.
Interesting aside, became good friends with one of the civic leaders, young civic leaders in Columbia, South Carolina, and if you look at what they've done, you could argue they're, 10 years ahead of us. And I asked him the very question, how in the world were you able to do some of these interesting developments? He said literally the old leadership had to die off. Literally had to happen. And then there was this period of time that I think we're kind of in, this vacuum of who's the leader, who's going to step up, what's the message, what is the program, what's the vision, and some of it's starting to coalesce, right? It's certainly a lot clearer than it used to be.
And I think Jim and I have talked about this a lot, that there are a lot of unique assets that Central Kentucky has, and that's exciting because we see the reason that a lot of people want to come back here and live is because it's a great place to live. It has a lot of unique attributes that people want to get back to if they've left. So I think for me, what's exciting is to look at this. How do you take this entrepreneurial community and in a very unique way leverage it against what's unique about this region? So there's the tourism stuff that's going on with the Bourbon Trail and that part of the industry, the Red River Gorge climbing, one of the top 5 places to climb in the U.S. or in the world, I guess.
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of unique aspects, I think, quality of life combined with these very unique things, the Keeneland, the horse industry, the bourbon industry, and those types of things, which for a lot of outsiders that come here then and finally get their, no pun intended, first taste of what it means to be around here, they're like blown away at kind of all the uniqueness.
Well, what does it mean for you to be, you talk Silicon Valley, you talk Boulder, you talk Austin. One of those things those 3 cities have in common is, comparative to here, an astronomical cost of living. Is it easier now to do a startup in a place like this, even though we don't have the VC that those areas do, to be able to continue to make a living, to get by while working on your company?
Well, certainly, cost perspective, the answer is absolutely yes. But if you look at who your investments in talent, so you're going to have to recruit those people back to here. And one of the challenges is what happens in those places is if you can take a flyer on a job, on a new, I'll join this startup, and if it doesn't work, I've got 8 other options. If you recruit somebody here, they take a flyer, they may not have any more options, so they have to leave again. And that's getting better, but that is one of the things that makes those communities so vibrant, is that they're able to mix and match. And we just hired a guy in the medical device space out in the Bay Area, 4 or 5 different jobs, and he totally understands the startups. It's like we've talked about your financial situation. I know where you are, I know what the risks are. And if this doesn't work in 6 months, I'll go find another job.
Yeah. Transient. They're transient. And if they've got very specific skills, it's usually pretty easy if they're tapped into the right networks.
You said earlier that you didn't choose this career path by knowingly, but going back in the past, would you go down this path again?
Oh yeah.
Glutton for punishment.
Yeah. I jokingly say I didn't choose it. I definitely chose it. You have forks in the road in your life, and I made certain very purposeful decisions to do things differently. For instance, my father did 35 years in the retail stock business, financial services business. Said to me at a very young age, "I don't want you to do this. The bloom's fallen off of this deal," and so I didn't pursue it. And yeah, I'd do it again. It's absolutely the most fun, and if you're attracted to the creative forces that are this life, I think there's no other place in business that you can do it like this. It's not for everybody.
I think that.
Does that mean our time's
I
up?
think
Because
it.
the beer's
Well,
running
yeah,
low?
I think we are running
This
low.
is like the hourglass.
Almost
As
done.
it starts to get down, it's time to roll.
Well, then they've got way more beers than I think we could try tonight, but we may as well give it an attempt.
So good.
So, this is Jim Clifton. Thank you so much.
Gentlemen,
Jim,
thank
for
you.
time.
I enjoyed it.
And thanks to the folks at GCB for having us here, and check out another one coming up here soon to our Facebook page, facebook.com/startupadvantage.
Thanks.